It is about the KNT assassination. Yes, associate from Lemmino.
Just let me know.
Yes, low 1 hour 38.
Right about here, in Dallas, Texas, American President John F. Kennedy was assassinated
1963,
November
right?
22nd, 1963. The accused assassin was a man named Lee Harvey Oswald. After being held in custody for less than 2 days, Oswald himself would meet a violent end. According to a subsequent investigation, Oswald had fired 3 rounds from the Texas school book Depository. Police recovered 3 shell casings and a bolt-action rifle on the 6th floor of the building. But the shooting of Oswald sparked immediate suspicions of conspiracy
going on.
That persist to this day and have driven most Americans to reject the government's conclusion that Oswald acted alone. The arguments for and against conspiracy take many shapes and forms. Far too many, in fact, to do them all justice in a single video. Instead, in this video, I want to zoom in and focus on a very narrow slice of this
Yes, there's more conspiracy.
Surrounding the Texas school book Depository. What exactly happened inside this building from where the shots that killed the president are believed to have been fired?
Inside the book depository, hiding of Oswald. Some Russian guy or something. And there's a lot of twists and turns and all.
As the name implies, the Texas School Book Depository was in the business of selling books. For $1.25 an hour, Oswald's job was to prepare the books for shipping. He did so by filling out forms and transporting cartons of books between the upper floors and the first. The building had 3 elevators, 2 staircases, and was 7 stories tall. In the northwest corner, 1 stairway and 2 freight elevators provided access to all 7 floors. A small passenger elevator near the front entrance stopped at level 4, while stories 1 and 2 were connected by a second flight of stairs. Lacking a driver's license, Oswald relied on Wesley Frazier to carpool between Irving and Dallas every Friday evening and Monday morning. He spent workdays at a rooming house in Dallas while spending the weekends with his wife and daughters in Irving. But on Thursday morning, November the 21st, the day before the assassination, Oswald decided to deviate from this routine.
I was standing there on the first floor getting the orders in, and Lee said, "Could I ride home with you this afternoon?" And I said, "Sure, like I told you. You can go home with me anytime you want to. Like I say, anytime you want to go see your wife, that is all right with me." Lee had never gone home in the middle of the week before, so I asked him why, and he stated that he was going home to get some curtain rods for his apartment. I asked if he was going home on Friday as well, and he said no.
Frazier drove Oswald back to Irving, where he arrived unannounced at the household of Ruth Payne. Both Payne and Marina were surprised to see Oswald on a Thursday. They assumed he'd come to make amends with Marina due to an argument they had had a few days before.
Did your husband give any reason for coming home on Thursday?
He said that he was lonely because he hadn't come the preceding weekend and he wanted to make his peace with me.
Was anything said about curtain rods or his taking curtain rods to town the following day?
No, I didn't have any.
He didn't say anything like that?
No.
The next day, Oswald said goodbye to his
It's
wife
could be lying,
and left
right?
the Payne residence about 7:15.
I have no idea.
Atop a dresser in the bedroom, he left behind his wedding ring. Oswald was next seen walking down the street by Lenny Randall, carrying a package. He was soon joined by Frazier, and the two of them took a seat in his car to begin their commute.
When you got in the car, did you say anything to Oswald, or did he say anything to you?
I noticed there was a package lying on the back seat. I didn't pay too much attention, and I said, "What's the package, Lee?" And he said, "Curtain rods." And I said, "Oh yes, you told me you were going to bring some today."
Not only was Oswald carrying a large package, but he'd forgotten to bring a lunch bag.
When he rode with me, I say he always brought lunch, except that one day on November 22nd. He didn't bring his lunch that day. Right when I got in the car, I asked him what was his lunch. He said he was going to buy his lunch that day.
They arrived in Dallas a few minutes before 8 o'clock. Typically, they would walk together from the parking lot to the book depository. But on this particular Friday, Oswald grabbed his curtain rods and rushed ahead into the building. Working on the ground floor, in view of the rear entrance, was their colleague, Jack Doherty.
Did you see Oswald come to work that morning?
Yes, when he first came into the door.
Did he have anything in his hands or arms?
Well, not that I could see of.
Fraser and Doherty are the only two people known to have seen Oswald entering the building. Fraser says he was carrying a package. Doherty says he was not. Contradictions like this one will become
contradicting
a
statement.
theme throughout the rest of this video. We'll take a closer look at the missing curtain rods in a later chapter, but for now, let's stay with Oswald. As the morning progressed, Oswald was seen working as normal. Roy Truly described him as an above-average worker who mostly kept to himself. In fact, he was a bit of a mystery to his colleagues.
On the way back and forth between Irving and Dallas,
Mystery man, huh?
talk very much to each other?
No, sir, not very much. He was one of these types that just didn't talk.
I was acquainted with Lee Oswald during the time he was employed at the book depository, but I never did get to know him well. He did not mix with the other employees and did not appear to want to make friends with me or any of the others.
Did you ever speak to Oswald?
Yes, sir.
Did he ever speak to you?
No, sir.
He never replied to you.
No, sir.
Would you say he was...
Actual NPC
Yes,
response.
sir, I would.
But there were exceptions to his reticence, and one of them occurred on this Friday morning. James Jarman was working on the ground floor when he observed Oswald staring at the window facing Elm Street.
Oswald was standing up in the window, and I went to the window also, and he asked me, what were people gathering around the corner for? And I told him that the president was supposed to pass in the morning, and he asked me did I know which way he was coming. And I told him, yes, he'll probably come down Main and turn on Houston and then back again on Elm. Then he said, oh, I see. And that was all.
It's a brief yet fascinating moment. It almost seems as though Oswald had no idea that Kennedy would pass by the book depository. This was indeed the case for some of his colleagues. Jarman himself had only been made aware of the fact shortly before he spoke with Oswald. There's no doubt that Oswald knew the president was coming to Dallas, but whether he knew the route of the
obviously, right?
motorcade is much more difficult to prove. The route of the motorcade had only been finalized a few days before the visit and hinged upon its destination. Kennedy was supposed to attend a banquet in Dallas, but no one could agree on a venue. It came down to two options: the Trade Mart northwest of downtown or the Women's Building to the east. One of the more vocal proponents of the Trade Mart was Texas Governor John Connally, and after much back and forth, he finally got his way on November the 14th. Had the Women's Building been selected, the motorcade would have sped through Dealey Plaza, east on Main Street, significantly further away and perpendicular to the book depository. Not to mention that First Lady Jacqueline would have been seated between the building and the president. The selection of the Trade Mart meant that the motorcade would now head west on Main Street and make
Just took a
turns
chance, that's
through
it.
Dealey Plaza to reach the northbound lanes on the freeway. Now, these turns could still have been avoided had the motorcade continued like so and not taken the freeway, but since the freeway was the more scenic and expedient route, it was the more attractive choice. All of that is to say, the success of the assassination was largely dependent upon the selection of the Trade Mart. It might therefore be tempting to cast suspicion upon Governor Connally, but it should be noted that he rode in the presidential limousine along with the Kennedys and suffered grave injuries during the shooting. Not only that, but Connally was actually opposed to a motorcade and favored a more direct route from the airport to the Trade Mart, a brief trip that would have bypassed Dealey Plaza altogether. He was unfortunately overruled by Kennedy himself, who wanted to see and be seen by the people of Dallas. Okay, so all that was happening behind the scenes, but as far as the public was aware, there wasn't even going to be a motorcade. As late as November the 15th, the Dallas Morning News reported that a motorcade seemed unlikely. But the very next day, the parade was finally confirmed. While the precise route followed by maps and detailed descriptions was not officially disclosed until November the 19th, someone familiar with Dallas could have approximated the route a few days in advance. That is to say, the earliest point a member of the public could have deduced that Kennedy would be driven past the book depository was November the 16th, less than a week before the visit. There's a good chance that Oswald saw these articles because he'd been observed reading political columns in the very same newspapers. Furthermore, we know from other aspects of Oswald's life that he was politically inclined.
Well, I have studied Marxist philosophy, yes, sir, and also other philosophers.
But are you a Marxist? I think you did admit on an earlier radio interview that you consider yourself a Marxist.
Oh, I would very definitely say that I am a Marxist. That is correct. But that does not mean, however, that I'm a communist.
What is the difference between the two?
Well, there's a great deal of difference. Several American parties in several countries are based on Marxism, such as Ghana. Certain countries have characteristics of a socialist system, such as Great Britain with its socialized medicine. These, then, are the differences between an outright communist country and countries which adhere to leftist or Marxist principles.
Conversely, a lack of interest in politics is precisely why at least one of Oswald's colleagues remained oblivious to the motorcade. So while it's understandable for someone apolitical to be taken off guard by a presidential visit, it makes far less sense for someone like Oswald.
On November 21st, the day before the assassination that you were describing, was there any discussion between you and your husband about President Kennedy's trip or proposed trip to Texas, Dallas,
Probably
and the
not.
Fort Worth area?
I asked Lee whether he knew where the president would speak and told him that I would very much like to hear him and to see him. I asked him how this could be done, but he said he didn't know how to do that and didn't enlarge any further on the subject.
Had there ever
This
been...
was also somewhat unusual,
No
his lack
comments.
of desire to talk about that subject any further.
How did you think it was unusual? Could you explain that?
The fact that he didn't talk a lot about it. He merely said something as an answer and did not have any further comments.
Do you mean by that, usually
Okay,
he would discuss
so-
a matter of that kind and show considerable interest?
Yes, of course. He would have told me who would be there and where this would take place.
We'll never know what Oswald was thinking when he spoke with James Jarman shortly before the assassination. But it is worth repeating, though, that Oswald was hired on October the 15th. That's a full month before the motorcade route had been decided, let alone announced to the public. On the morning of November the 22nd, a handful of employees had been assigned to install a new plywood floor on the 6th floor of the book depository. Every once in a while, they would catch a glimpse of Oswald.
I saw Lee Oswald shortly before lunchtime. He was by himself with a piece of paper in his hand. I had nothing to say to him, but some of the other male employees teased him and told him he ought to go get a haircut. Lee Oswald just laughed at this remark.
Given spotted Oswald approaching.
Lee was coming from the window up front where the shots were fired from.
Did you watch where he walked to?
Well, no, sir. I didn't pay much attention. I was getting ready to get on the elevator, and I say, "Boy, are you going downstairs?"
What did he say to you?
I say, "It's near lunchtime," and he said, "No, sir. When you get downstairs, close the gate to the elevator." That meant the elevator on the west side. You can pull both gates down, and it'll come up by itself.
What else did he say?
That is all. I said, "Okay," and got on the elevator.
And with that, Givens became the last
Okay.
person inside the book depository known to have seen Oswald before the
In who would have
assassination.
thought he would kill
At
the
least, that's
president?
the official story. The encounter was fixed at 11:55, more than half an hour before the shooting. But other employees claimed to have seen Oswald in other parts of the building around the same time or even later than Givens. Givens himself
What?
provided conflicting accounts. But
It can be
ahead of
possible,
this,
right?
This encounter notwithstanding, Givens was not the last person to visit the 6th floor. Shortly after Givens had left, Bonnie Williams grabbed his lunch and went upstairs. He sat down right about here to await the president's arrival.
Now, when you were sitting by the window, could you see down towards the southeast corner?
No, sir. I couldn't see anything as I remember there. About the only thing that I could see from there would be the top edge of the window because the boxes were stacked up.
Did you see anyone else up there that day?
No, I did not.
The southeast corner is the location from where the shots that killed the president
10:01.
The
Interesting.
sniper's nest. Williams says he was alone, but admits his view was obstructed by tall stacks of boxes. Meanwhile, down by the main entrance, someone was attempting to gain access to the building.
I met an elderly white man at the entrance of the building who asked me to direct him to a restroom. The man was very old and feeble and could hardly make it up the steps. About 5 minutes later, I saw this man leave the building and enter an old Buick automobile with 3 elderly ones
leaning out the far east windows on the 5th floor. But movement could also be seen on the floor above them, a floor that, by all accounts, was now supposed to be empty.
Okay, here comes the shooting.
Awaiting the motorcade by the east curb of Houston was a young, newlywed couple named Arnold and Barbara Rowland. Some 15 minutes before the shooting, Arnold spotted a white man in the westernmost window on the 6th floor of the book depository. The man was holding a rifle, his gaze locked at Houston. Despite standing a few meters away from an officer, Arnold chose not to report the gunman.
Did it ever enter your mind that you should go and tell the policeman of this sight or this vision that you had seen?
Really, it didn't.
It never entered your mind.
I never dreamed of
It's a high school, so
I mean, I must honestly say, my opinion was based on movies I have seen, on the attempted assassination of Theodore Roosevelt, and the other one, Franklin Roosevelt. And both of these had Secret Service men up in windows or on top of the buildings with rifles. And this is how my opinion was based, and why it didn't alarm me. Perhaps if I had been older and had more experience in life, it might have made a difference. It very well could have. Do you ever have reoccurring dreams, sir?
What?
Do you ever have reoccurring dreams?
Yes.
what is this question?
This is a reoccurring dream of mine, sir. All the time. What if I'd told someone about it? I knew about it enough in advance, and perhaps it could have been prevented. I mean, this is something which shakes me up at times.
The kill.
If Rowland's recollection is accurate, it stands in direct conflict with that of Bonnie Williams, who claimed to have eaten lunch on the same floor at the same time. Williams neither saw nor heard anyone, despite having an unobstructed view down to the southwest corner of the building where Rowland claimed to have seen the gunman. Few realized what had happened. Was it a firecracker, backfiring motorcycle, or presidential salute? People near the Rowlands even started laughing.
Yeah, I don't realize it when it happened in the moment.
Frightened by the ostensibly harmless explosion. Standing by the northwest corner of Elm in Houston was James Worrell. He thought the explosion had come from directly overhead. Sure enough, on one of the upper floors, Worrell could see the barrel of a gun. At that moment, a second explosion echoed through Dealey Plaza. Worrell and Ewens witnessed the recoil and muzzle flash of the rifle in concurrence with the sound. Brennan had yet to realize what was happening. He thought a firecracker had been thrown from the book depository. He looked up, and the man he'd seen pacing only minutes before was now aiming down the sights of a rifle.
It's not known for sure, but it is believed that President Kennedy has been shot.
President Kennedy and Texas Governor John Connally shot by an assassin.
Well,
Brennan could only recall hearing 2 shots, but his testimony implies he might have heard 3. He confusingly said he saw the
Might
gun
have
fire the
heard.
last shot, yet denied seeing the discharge of the rifle.
and så maybe bara ask
In the immediate
others.
aftermath of the shooting, the rifle was seen by a handful of witnesses as the gunman cautiously withdrew from the window.
The rifle, or what looked like a rifle, was drawn fairly slowly back into the building, and I saw no one in the window with it. I didn't even see a form in the window.
I could see his hand, the rifle laying across his hand. And I could see his hand sticking out on the trigger part. After he got through, he just pulled it back in the window.
He drew the gun back from the window, as though he was drawing it back to his side, and maybe paused for another second, as though to assure himself that he hit his mark, and then he disappeared.
Neither Ewens nor Worrell saw the face of the gunman and could thus offer little to no information regarding his appearance. Arnold was quite some distance away, yet furnished a basic description of the man he'd seen about a quarter of an hour before the shooting, a description that was quite similar to the one provided by Brennan, who got the best look at the gunman. Taken together, these accounts paint a picture of an
he
assassin
saw the whole
on the
thing.
6th floor of the book depository, taking aim with a rifle and firing at the
That
president
guy.
from the sniper's nest. But other accounts leave room for a bit of doubt. As previously mentioned, Arnold Roland spotted a white man with a rifle in the westernmost window on the 6th floor about 12:15. But as late as 5 minutes before the shooting, Arnold observed an elderly black man leaning out the easternmost window on the same floor. He might have confused the 6th floor with the 5th, where James Jarman, Bonnie Williams and Harold Norman did indeed lean out the windows. In fact, they were the only black employees known to have watched the motorcade from a floor above the 1st. Except they could hardly be described as elderly. But then, take a listen to this.
Will you describe with as much particularity as you can what that man looked like?
It seemed to me an elderly black man. That is about all. I didn't pay very much attention to him.
This question was then repeated to Arnold a few minutes later, at which point his answer had dramatically changed.
He was very thin, an elderly gentleman, bald or practically bald. Very thin hair if he wasn't bald. Had on a plaid shirt.
It's a black guy.
Green. Very bright color. That is why I remember it.
Can you give us an estimate as to age?
50, possibly 55 or 60.
Can you give us an estimate as to height?
5'8", 5'10", in that neighborhood. He was very slender, very thin.
Can you give us a more definite description as to complexion?
Very dark or fairly dark. Not real dark compared to some black men, but fairly dark. Seemed like his face was either, I can't recall detail, but it was either very wrinkled or marked in some way.
So, in the span of a few minutes,
Oswald was white now.
didn't pay very much attention to describing the man's complexion, hair, clothing,
Maybe he could have just remembered it.
build, and even the blemishes on his face.
Sometimes some people are prone to exaggerate more than others, and without in any way meaning to take away from the testimony of your husband as to what he saw in the building at the time, just from your general experience, do you feel you can rely on everything that your husband says?
I don't feel that I can rely on everything anybody says.
Well, this is really
That's
not a
a
fair
big
question for me to ask any
answer.
wife about her husband, and I am not asking it very correctly,
At
but
times, my husband is prone to exaggerate. Does that answer it?
I think it does. Is there anything else you want to add to that, or not?
Usually,
this guy.
his exaggerations are not concerned with anything other than himself. They're usually to boost his ego. They usually say that he is really smarter than he is, or he's a better salesman than he is. Something like that.
As leading as that line of questioning was, Barbara was not alone in doubting her husband's credibility.
Okay.
Officials at 2 separate high schools attended by Arnold explicitly warned authorities not to trust everything he says. He was characterized as someone who would not hesitate to fabricate a story and not tell the truth regarding any matter. Indeed, Roland lied or exaggerated on multiple occasions when he testified. Another witness who claimed to have seen a gunman in the book depository was Carolyn Walter. Shortly before the arrival of the motorcade, Walter had seen a man with blonde or light brown hair in one of these windows on the 4th or 5th floor. She explicitly ruled out the 6th. It should be noted, however, that during the shooting, this window was closed with the blinds down, while this one, as you already know, was occupied by Bonnie Williams and Harold Norman. In any case, the light-haired man seen by Walter was holding a machine gun, and standing beside him was another man wearing a brown suit. Much like
Machine gun?
Walter assumed the gunman was a presidential guard and refrained from telling the police. In fact, there's no evidence she told anyone of what she'd seen, not even the colleague with whom she watched the motorcade. In Walter's defense, 2 other witnesses recalled seeing a man with light or light brown hair on the 5th or 6th floor, except they never saw a weapon nor an accomplice. Disagreements regarding the floors were at least in part due to the ground floor lacking visible windows.
How do you know it was the 6th floor rather than the 5th floor?
I went with the FBI and I showed them the window, and I didn't count the bottom floor.
You mean the first time you gave a statement, you didn't count the bottom floor?
That's right.
Another source of confusion was the distinct visual difference between the 7th floor and the ones below.
When you first glance at the building, you're thrown off a little as to the floors because there's a ridge. It almost looks like a structure added onto the top of the building, about 1 story above, so you have to recount.
Not only that, but multiple witnesses described the 6th floor as the 2nd floor from the top, but in the chaos that ensued, it seems the tail end of that sentence was not always recorded.
It's just confusing.
Witness because even though he never saw the gunman's face, he did see the top of his head somehow.
What did you see in the building?
I saw a bald spot on this man's head. Trying to look out the window, he had a bald spot on his head. I was looking at the bald spot.
Oswald did not have a bald spot. He was thinning a bit in the front, but otherwise had a full head of hair.
Actually, Malde.
The strength of Ewan's account is somewhat diminished by his inability to recall much of anything else.
Could you tell whether he was a black gentleman or a white man?
No, sir.
Couldn't even tell that, but you have described that he had a bald
spot in his head. Yes, sir. I could see the bald spot in his head.
Now, could you tell what color hair he had?
So you can tell the color of the skin.
Dark or light?
No, sir.
Long after the assassination, 15 years to be precise, a journalist working for the Dallas Morning News tracked down a man named Johnny Powell. Powell had supposedly seen two men fiddling with a scope on a rifle in the sniper's nest. He described their complexion as darker than white, but that was about it. Once again, one has to wonder if he confused the gunmen with Jarman, Williams and Norman on the floor below. I mean, after 15 years of silence, there's no telling how Powell's memory could have been distorted. A good example of such distortion is Richard Carr. A few minutes before the shooting, Carr had been standing roughly here when he spotted a man on the 7th floor of the Book Depository, all the way over here. The man was white and wore a hat, glasses and sport coat. In the immediate aftermath of the shooting, Carr returned to ground level and caught sight of what he believed to be the same man now trotting south on Houston. He made a left turn right about here before being picked up by a station wagon. By 1969, however, Carr's story had notably changed. The man with a sport coat had now been standing on the 5th floor, not the 7th. After the shooting, Mr. Sportcoat had emerged from behind the Book Depository, accompanied by two other men.
Changing to class.
Picked up by a separate station wagon before speeding away. It's unclear how Carr is supposed to have seen all of this, considering what he told the FBI back in '64.
Carr advised that from his location on the steel structure of the new courthouse building, it would have been impossible for him to observe the lower floors and entrance of the Book Depository, and that from his position he could only see the top floor and the roof.
In Carr's defense, James Worrell had seen a man emerge from the rear entrance of the Book Depository about 3 minutes after the shooting. This man also wore a sport coat and headed south on Houston. Except the man seen by Carr was kinda stocky and wore a hat, while the man seen by Worrell had a slender build and was hatless. Besides, anyone connected with the shooting, leaving via the rear entrance, would surely have headed north, not towards the scene of the crime. As if that was not enough, two other witnesses, James Romack and George Rackley, stood roughly here for several minutes after the shooting. Both of them paid special attention to the rear entrance of the building.
Mr. Romack stated that from the time he heard the shots, he had looked toward the Book Depository and had, under his immediate observation, the loading dock and the back door. He stated he is positive that no one came out of this door or out of the loading dock doors.
Could you see the back door of the Texas School Book Depository?
Yes.
Were you looking towards that direction?
Yes, sir.
About how long did you keep your eyes fixed over there?
Oh, I would say 5 minutes anyhow. Probably 10. I was looking up that way at all times.
Did you see any people leave the Texas School Book Depository by way of the rear exit?
No, sir.
Did you see any people
How do you know that?
Houston Street?
No, sir.
Unfortunately, conflicting accounts were not limited to the Book Depository. Among the hundreds of witnesses in the vicinity of Dealey Plaza, nothing was as disputed as the number and origin of the gunshots.
And Governor Conley was holding his stomach.
And the shots were almost simultaneously, weren't they?
Yes, sir. They were probably 10 seconds apart.
Do you know who fired the third shot?
I didn't hear a third. I don't recall a third shot. There may have been. My family hit the ground, and I don't recall a third shot. I just couldn't. I'm not certain of that. I do know I heard 2 shots.
Yeah, I heard 3. I know
You
there
heard
were 3.
Well,
Yeah, I said to Jerry after the second shot, I said, my God, those are gunshots.
We had 3. There's a conspiracy and control.
No one knows exactly how many spectators were in or near Dealey Plaza at the time of the assassination.
Maybe you should
Over 200
train your
were
ears
questioned by a combination of authorities, journalists and others. Attempts have
to hear
been
the
made to
source perfectly.
consolidate the various accounts, and it's clear from all such attempts
Maybe
that
two sources align together.
scored 3 shots. What's a bit less clear is the source of the explosions. The gunman was either placed in the vicinity of the book depository, marked here in red, or an area west of the building, marked in green, known as the grassy knoll. But as you can see from these pie charts, the assessment of earwitness testimony is highly susceptible to bias. It's a surprisingly subjective exercise that can lead to widely different results. Nevertheless, there were a substantial number of witnesses who pointed to the grassy knoll, located roughly here, and many of them were scattered throughout the plaza. To give you some examples, August Campbell was standing near the front entrance of the book depository, yet believed the shots had come from the grassy knoll. Meanwhile, Marilyn Sitzman was standing on the grassy knoll, yet believed the shots had come from the book depository. Standing beside Campbell was a woman named Geraldine Reed, who believed the shots had come from the book depository. Standing by the curb in front of Sitzman was William Newman, who believed the shots had come from the grassy knoll. One might therefore conclude that there must have been 2 assassins, one in the book depository and one on the grassy knoll. Indeed, countless authors and even a congressional investigation have done precisely that. Now, the scope of this video is not nearly exhaustive enough for me to attempt any conclusions regarding a second gunman, but I do want to leave you with this. You might have seen these unlabeled blue slices before. Well, that's how many witnesses heard gunshots coming from multiple directions. That is to say, next to no one did. All the shots came either from the east or west, not both.
Mr. Campbell believed the noise came from away from the book depository. This illusion, he explained, may have been due to the sound bouncing off the building and other objects in the vicinity.
August Campbell was far from alone in being deceived by the pronounced echoes of the gunshots.
Where did the noises or shots sound to you like they came from?
It was hard to tell because they had an echo, you know. There was actually 2 explosions with each one. There was the shot and then the echo from it, so it was hard to tell. There was too much reverberation.
No
There was
help.
an echo which gave me a sound all over. In other words, that square is it had a sound all over. The sounds came either from up against the school depository building or near the mouth of the triple underpass. I had worked in this watchtower for some 10 or 12 years and was there during the time they were renovating the school depository building, and had noticed at that time the similarity of sounds occurring in either of those 2 locations. There's a reverberation which takes place from either location.
This auditory illusion was not a fluke. Not only did the buildings surrounding Dealey Plaza act as an echo chamber, but even experienced hunters can struggle to pinpoint the number and origin of gunshots by sound alone. Here's a quote from a book on that very topic, published a few years before the assassination.
Little credence should be put in what anyone says about a shot or even the number of shots. These things coming upon a person suddenly are generally extremely inaccurately recorded in their memory. One of the authors asked one deer hunter last fall how many shots another hunter less than 100 yards away had fired. The answer was 5. Actually, only 2 shots were fired.
Employees in the book depository were less confused about the gunshots than the spectators outside. To give you some examples, on the first floor, Eddie Piper heard 3 shots that appeared to come from inside the building. On the third floor, Edna Case and Sandra Ellison heard nothing. Meanwhile, Stephen Wilson on the same floor,
Really nothing.
3 shots came from the
What
west.
did they do?
On the fourth floor, Elsie Dorman, multiple shots came from this building across the street. Victoria Adams, 3 shots from the west. Mary Hollis, 3 shots inside the building. But some employees not only heard the shots, but could literally feel the explosions shake the building.
Could you tell where the shots were coming from?
Yes, sir. They came from inside the building.
How do you know that?
Because the building vibrated from the result of the explosion coming in.
Did you know they were shots at the time?
Yes, sir. They sounded almost like cannon shots. They were so terrific.
Much like Geneva Hine on the second floor, Bonnie Williams could feel the explosions up on the 5th. It sounded to Williams as though the shots had been fired from the floor above. His colleague, James Jarman, initially thought the shots had come from somewhere below, but then changed his mind and agreed with Williams. Harold Norman, meanwhile, heard far more.
Actual prepesa.
Just after the president passed by, I heard a shot. And several seconds later, I heard 2 more shots. I knew that the shots had come from directly above me, and I could hear the expended cartridges fall to the floor. I could also hear the bolt action of the rifle.
The explosions shook the building, and a piece of loose plaster or dirt was dislodged from the ledge above and struck Williams in the head. Meanwhile, spectators on the streets below could see them leaning out the windows, looking up at the 6th floor.
I just looked straight up ahead of me, which would have been looking at the school book depository, and I noticed 2 black men in a window, straining to see directly above them, and my eyes followed right up to the window above them, and I saw the rifle, or what looked like a rifle.
Frightened and somewhat entranced by the pandemonium outside, the 3 men remained on the 5th floor for several minutes. Meanwhile, the apparent assassin upstairs was now in a race against time.
Did you hear anything upstairs at all?
No, sir. I didn't hear anything.
Any footsteps?
No, sir. Probably. The reason we didn't hear anything is because, after the shots, we were running too, and that was making a louder noise.
Why didn't you go up to the 6th floor?
I really don't know. We just never did think about it. Maybe it's because we were frightened.
When the shooting began, motorcycle policeman Marion Baker had just made a right turn from Main Street to Houston.
And I caught a glimpse of this man walking away from this. I happened to see him through this window in this door. I don't know how come I saw him, but I had a glimpse of him coming down there.
Where was he coming from, do you know?
No, sir. All I seen of him was a glimpse of him go away from me.
What did you do?
I hollered at him at that time and said, "Come here." He turned and walked right straight back to me.
What did you say to him?
I didn't get anything out of him. Mr. Truly had come up to my side here, and I turned to Mr. Truly and I says, "Do you know this man? Does he work here?" And he said, "Yes." And I turned immediately and went on out up the stairs.
The man whom Baker actually encountered in the 2nd floor lunchroom was none other than Lee Harvey Oswald. The encounter was brief, lasting no more than 30 seconds. Oswald appeared calm and failed to evoke suspicion, so Truly and Baker left him in the lunchroom and proceeded up the stairs. They spent some time searching the roof, but there was no assassin to be found. Down by the main entrance, Geraldine Reed was still trying to process what had just occurred. She decided to return to her office on the 2nd floor of the building. Here, about 2 minutes after the shooting, Reed became the last known person to have seen Oswald inside the book depository.
I kept walking and I looked up and Oswald was coming in the back door of the office. I met him by the time I passed my desk by several feet, and I told him, I said, "Oh, the president has been shot, but maybe they didn't hit him." He mumbled something to me. I kept walking. He did too. I didn't pay any attention to what he said because I had no thoughts of him having any connection with the shooting at all, because he was very calm.
Oswald is then presumed to have taken the front stairs, and on his way out the main entrance, encountered someone looking for a phone. There are at least 2 candidates for who this person might have been, but Oswald seems to have
The actual running down the stairs. No, sir.
Did you hear anyone using the stairs?
No, sir.
Maybe
But
it
okay,
was
perhaps
just
Oswald was up 2
traumatized.
flights above, and his footsteps were drowned out by their own. This would mean that Stiles and Adams left the 4th floor mere seconds ahead of Oswald's arrival, reached the ground floor mere seconds ahead of Roy Truly and Marion Baker's ascent, before encountering William Shelley and Billy Lovelady right about here. But this is when problem number 2 makes an entrance. When the president was shot, Shelley and Lovelady stood on the front steps of the book depository. They spent several minutes roaming about outside before returning to the building. And that's the problem. How did Stiles and Adams encounter Shelley and Lovelady within seconds of the shooting if it took them several minutes to return to the building?
Who did you see on the 1st floor after returning to the book depository?
I saw a girl, but I wouldn't swear to it. It's Vicky.
What is her full name?
I wouldn't know.
Vicky Adams?
I believe so.
Would you say it was Vicky you saw?
I couldn't swear.
Where was the girl?
I don't remember what place she was, but I
He
remember
said
seeing
he
a
could
girl.
swear.
She was talking to Shelley or saw Shelley or something.
Shelley could recall no such incident. Presuming that Lovelady was correct and Shelley had a lapse of memory, it's possible their encounter with Stiles and Adams occurred minutes rather than seconds after the shooting. After all, Adams could have been mistaken. This scenario implies that Oswald made his escape, Truly and Baker went upstairs, and then several minutes later, Stiles and Adams left the building. But it's not quite that simple. Watching the motorcade alongside Stiles and Adams was their supervisor, Dorothy Garner.
Miss Garner stated this morning that after Miss Adams went downstairs, Miss Garner, saw Mr. Truly and the policeman come up.
Not only does this account corroborate that of Adams, meaning they left within seconds, not minutes, but it implies that Garner was in a position to observe the stairway from somewhere on the 4th floor. In spite of this, Garner made no mention of seeing Oswald scampering down the stairs between Stiles and Adams' departure and Truly and Baker's arrival. What makes this conflict so difficult to resolve is that neither Stiles nor Garner were called to testify. We have but a few brief statements of what they witnessed. All we know about Sandra Stiles is that she went down the stairs with Adams. Did it happen within seconds of the shooting?
Memory could have been
Did she see or
tempered.
hear anyone else while running down the stairs? We don't know. Did she encounter Shelley and Lovelady on the 1st floor? We don't know. Authorities appear to have presumed Adams unreliable and then ignored the witnesses who could have easily refuted or confirmed that presumption. A simple reenactment like the one granted Truly and Baker could have gone a long way to resolve this issue. But that never happened. Many decades after the assassination, author Barry Ernest was able to track down Sandra Stiles, Dorothy Garner, and Victoria Adams. Stiles confirmed that she and Adams left the window within seconds of the shooting, but she doesn't explicitly say they left the 4th floor within seconds. In any case, as they moved quickly down the stairs, she heard no footfall apart from their own. Garner confirmed she never witnessed the descent of Oswald, despite seeing Truly and Baker heading upstairs. Adams went a bit further and accused investigators of tampering with their testimony.
I'm beginning to wonder if the Shelley and Lovelady encounter was inserted into my testimony later. I remember saying to a fairly big black man inside the building, right near the loading dock, right after I got down the stairs, that I thought the president may have been shot.
Sandra Stiles apparently told Ernest something similar.
A few people were milling around on the 1st floor. One was a black man. Shelley and Lovelady were definitely not on the 1st floor when we got there.
The only black employees who could have possibly made it to the rear stairway in time were Carl Jones, Roy Lewis, Eddie Piper, and Troy West. What you see here are their approximate positions at the time of the shooting, but during the seconds and minutes that followed, only Piper didn't pay any attention to the stairs in the back. As soon as the shooting began, Piper crossed the 1st floor to get a better view of a clock. He remained in roughly this location until he observed Truly and Baker running up the stairs.
Had anybody come down the steps before Truly and Baker went up the steps?
No, sir.
Did Vicky Adams come down before Truly and Baker went up the steps?
No, sir. No, sir. She didn't do it.
Remember James Romack and George Rackley? I mean, I wouldn't blame you if you don't, there's like 100 different names to keep track of, but they were the ones who failed to spot anyone leaving the book depository via the rear entrance for several minutes after the shooting. Well, the thing is, according to both Stiles and Adams, they left the book depository via the rear entrance upon reaching the 1st floor. So if Romack and Rackley are to be believed, then once again, the descent of Stiles and Adams must have taken place minutes rather than seconds after the shooting. Not only that, but when Sandra Stiles was contacted by another researcher, she apparently expressed great uncertainty regarding the stairwell descent and thought it might in fact have occurred a couple of minutes after the shooting. I don't know what to make of all this. The conspiracy crowd will, of course, amplify the more suspicious elements, while those who support the official narrative will focus on that which discredits Adams. But ultimately, we don't know the exact timeline of events. It's difficult enough to pin down the minute-by-minute chronology. Once you get down to seconds, there's a lot of guesswork at play. The time trials by Truly and Baker gives us a rough estimate, but that's not cast in stone. It could have easily been a bit faster, a bit slower. So too could have Shelley, Lovelady, Garner, Stiles, Adams, and Oswald.
Would you say that the reconstruction that we did on March the 20th was a minimum or a maximum time?
Oh, I would say that would be the minimum time. We did everything that I did that day, and this would be the minimum time, because I'm sure that it took me a little longer.
I must also mention that we don't know much about the layout of the 4th floor beyond this crude schematic. If the other floors are any indication, much of this space was occupied by bookshelves and tall stacks of boxes. This is significant because Dorothy Garner never actually saw Stiles and Adams enter the stairway. She only heard footsteps of what she presumed to be them running down the stairs. Following a quick sweep of the roof, Roy Truly and Marion Baker returned to the ground floor of the book depository.
What did you do when you got
I
back to
don't
the
know where
first
the
floor?
actual shooting took
What did you
place.
see?
When I got back to the first floor, at first I didn't see anything except officers running around, reporters in the place. There was a regular madhouse.
Had they sealed off the building yet, do you know?
I am sure they had.
Then what?
Then, in a few minutes, it could have been moments or minutes at a time like that, I noticed some of my boys were over in the west corner of the shipping department, and there were several officers over there taking their names and addresses and so forth. I noticed that Lee Oswald was not among these boys.
Oswald was not the only absentee, but he was the only one whom Truly knew for a fact had left the building after the shooting. Meanwhile, on the 6th floor, a stack of boxes in the southeast corner attracted the attention of Deputy Luke Mooney.
I went straight across to the southeast corner of the building, and I saw these high boxes, and the minute I squeezed between these two stacks of boxes, I had to turn myself sideways to get in there. That is when I saw the expended shells, and the boxes that were stacked up looked to be a rest for the weapon.
2 windows west of the sniper's nest, authorities found a bottle of Dr. Pepper and some chicken bones, leftovers from the lunch eaten by Bonnie Williams shortly before the assassination. But according to some officers, including Mooney, remains of a similar meal were also found.
I guess there's not a spin in there.
Does this photograph show any place where you saw the chicken bone?
If I recall correctly, the chicken bone could have been laying on this box, or it might have been laying on this box right here. There was one of them partially eaten, and there was a little small paper poke.
By poke, you mean a paper sack?
Right. The assassin could just maybe take one step and lay it over there, if he was the one that put it there.
In spite of this, no such items were ever photographed. Apart from the sack of chicken bones found here, there are no records of leftovers being recovered from anywhere else near the sniper's nest.
Now, did you see a chicken bone over near the boxes in the southeast corner?
I don't believe there was one there.
You didn't see any. One witness, a deputy sheriff named Luke Mooney, said he found a piece of chicken partly eaten on top of one of the boxes. Did you see anything like that?
No.
Was anything like that called to your attention?
I can't recall anything like that.
But it wasn't just the chicken bones. There were similar disagreements regarding the 3 cartridge cases. According to Mooney, Dallas Police Captain William Fritz tampered with the evidence.
Are those the empty shells you found?
Tampering?
Yes, sir.
Now, will you take
Yes,
this
that's
marker
wrong.
and encircle the shells?
All right.
They were turned over to Captain Fritz?
Yes, sir. He was the first officer that picked him up, as far as I know, because I stood there and watched him go over and pick them up and look at them.
Is this the position of the cartridges, as shown in this photograph, as you saw them?
Yes, sir. That is just about the way they were laying. To the best of my knowledge, I do know there was one further away, and these other 2 were relatively close to each other on this particular area. But these cartridges, this one and this one, looks like they are further apart than they actually was.
Now, I didn't quite understand. Did you say that it was your memory that A and B were not that close together?
Just from my memory, it seems that this cartridge ought to have been over this way a little further.
You mean the B cartridge should be closer to the C?
Closer to the C, yes, sir.
Mooney did not explicitly state, but strongly implied that Captain Fritz moved at least one of the cartridge cases before they were photographed. According to Fritz, he did everything by the book.
I told him not to move the cartridges, not to touch anything till we could get the crime lab to take pictures of them, just as they were lying there. And I left an officer assigned there to see that that was done. And the crime lab came almost immediately and took pictures, and dusted the shelves for prints.
India crime pattern, tampering
On the
evidence.
6th floor was a lone journalist by the name of Thomas Ollier. Ollier was equipped with a camera and actually filmed much of the frantic search effort. About 3 decades later, Ollier made some rather startling claims that were largely consistent with, but also expanded upon those made by Mooney.
After filming the casings, I asked Captain Fritz, who was standing at my side, if I could go behind the barricade and get a close-up shot of the casings. He told me that it would be better if I got my shots from outside the barricade. He then rounded the pile of boxes and entered the enclosure. This was the first time anybody walked between the barricade and the windows. Fritz then walked to the casings, picked them up, and held them in his hand over the top of the boxes for me to get a close-up shot of the evidence. I filmed about 8 seconds of a close-up shot of the shell casings in Captain Fritz's hand.
While these alleged portions of Ollier's film have never surfaced, preservation took a back seat while the film was being prepared for broadcast. Portions of the film were carelessly chopped up and discarded, and fragmentary clips are all that remains today. In any case, after supposedly filming the casings in the hand of Captain Fritz, Ollier recalled how they were deceitfully returned to the floor.
Over 30 minutes later, Captain Fritz reached into his pocket and handed the casings to Detective Robert Studebaker. Studebaker never saw the original placement of the casings, so he tossed them on the floor and photographed them.
To counterbalance these allegations of foul play, I must also mention that there were those who found nothing amiss about the cartridge cases.
Did you see a picture taken of the holes?
Yes, sir.
When the picture was taken, were the holes in the same position as when you had first seen them?
Yes, sir, they were.
Even Mooney sort of agreed that the casings had not been moved, immediately after explaining that they had been moved. In the testimony we heard a few minutes ago, Mooney was shown this photograph. He then examined this one, taken from a different angle, before being shown this one. Now, these two are just differently cropped copies of the same photograph.
I have another picture. Here is a picture taken, also from another angle. Does that show the cartridges?
Yes, sir.
Now, compare that with the other photograph.
Yes, sir.
Is that about the way it looked?
Yes, sir. That is right. It sure is.
That doesn't really gel with the casing supposedly being
Just here, why?
haphazardly tossed back on the floor, as Thomas Ollier would claim decades later. While there are question marks surrounding the chicken bones and cartridge cases, there can be no doubt that some of the boxes in the sniper's nest were moved prior to being photographed.
Do you have any pictures of the boxes near the window before they were moved, other than those you have showed me?
Just these two.
Then you don't have any pictures taken of the boxes before they were moved?
No.
Now, I will show you another picture. Was that taken by you?
Yes.
Does that show the position of the boxes before or after they were moved?
That's after they were dusted. There's fingerprint dust on every box.
And they were not in that position then when you first saw them?
No.
Several minutes after the sniper's nest was discovered, a bolt-action rifle was found between 2 rows of boxes near the stairway. Now, there was some initial confusion regarding its make and model. Some thought it looked like a Mauser, but upon closer inspection it was identified as an Italian Carcano. The officer who misidentified the rifle later explained that he did so at a glance. However, over a decade after the assassination in 1976, a former deputy sheriff by the name of Roger Craig claimed to have seen the marking 7.65 Mauser stamped right on the barrel of the rifle. To some, this is evidence that a Mauser was in fact discovered on the 6th floor before it was swapped for a Carcano. But Craig was the only person to make this specific claim, did so many years after the assassination, and after telling a journalist the following.
Did you handle that rifle on the 6th floor?
Yes, I did. I couldn't give its name because I don't know foreign rifles. I know it was foreign made, and you loaded it downward into a built-in clip. But there was another rifle, a Mauser, found up on the roof of the depository that afternoon.
There were no reports of a Mauser being found on the roof either. Besides, the only rifle seen in the film taken by Thomas Ollier is unmistakably a Carcano. Unique markings on the cartridge cases would later prove that this was indeed the rifle from which all 3 had been fired. Before the day was over, the rifle had been traced to a company in Chicago, Illinois. The company had sold the rifle to someone named A. Hiddell and shipped it to a post office box in Dallas in early 1963. Alec James Siddell was a pseudonym known to have been used by Oswald. So there was now a direct link between the shells, the rifle, and Oswald. Not only that, but Oswald's prints were lifted from both the rifle and boxes in the sniper's nest. Apart from the spent shells and the rifle, authorities discovered one other key piece of evidence.
Did you find anything else up in the southeast corner of the 6th floor?
Yes, sir. We found this brown paper sack, or case. It was made out of heavy wrapping paper. Actually, it looked similar to the paper that those books in the building was wrapped in. It was just a long, narrow paper bag.
The bag was alleged to have been found here, yet this space is suspiciously empty in all the crime scene photographs.
How long was the paper bag, approximately?
I don't
Maybe
know.
it was sitting there.
I picked it up and dusted it for prints, and they took it down there and sent it to Washington. And that's the last I'd seen of it, and I don't know.
Did you take a picture of it before you picked it up?
No.
Does that sack show in any of the pictures you took?
No, it doesn't show in any of the pictures.
Detective Robert Studebaker, who'd been working as a forensic assistant for less than 2 months, neglected to explain why he never photographed the bag. In Studebaker's defense, no one was on the lookout for a brown paper bag. Assassin, sure, rifle, casings, absolutely, but some debris in a dark-lit corner of the room. It wasn't until the bag was picked up and inspected that its significance became apparent.
Do you remember anything about what the sack looked like?
Well, it was assumed at the time that it was the sack that the rifle was wrapped up in when it was brought into the building, and it appeared that it could have been used for that.
Now, as you may recall, Wesley Frazier drove Oswald back to Irving on November 21st to pick up some curtain rods. The following morning, Oswald was seen carrying a package by both Frazier and his sister, Linnie Randall. According to Frazier, Oswald told him the package contained curtain rods which he then brought back to Dallas. But you may also recall that Jack Doherty denied seeing such a package.
Did you see Oswald come to work that morning?
Yes, when he first came into the door.
Did he have anything in his hands or arms?
Well, not that I could see.
The gun in advance. Witness. When questioned by the FBI and Secret Service, he appeared very confused about times and places. He required assistance from his father due to considerable difficulty in coordinating his mental faculties with his speech. While Doherty denied having such issues, his testimony is nonetheless riddled with contradictions.
Wait a minute, did you go to lunch?
Well, I went back downstairs to eat lunch. Yes, sir.
What time?
Oh, it was 12 o'clock.
Wait a minute, did you hear the shots before or after your lunch?
Before I ate my lunch.
You heard shots before you ate your lunch?
Let's see. Yes, I believe I did.
Now, did you hear a shot either before or after lunch?
It was before lunch. It was before lunch.
You think it was before lunch you heard the shot?
I believe it was. Yes, sir.
While Doherty insisted that Oswald had nothing in his hands when he arrived at work, it turned out that this certitude was based on nothing but a glance.
Now, is that a very definite impression that you saw Oswald that morning when he came to work?
Well, it's like this. I'll try to explain it to you this way. You see, I was sitting on the wrapping table, and when he came in the door, I just caught him out of the corner of my eye.
Given that Frazier had eyes on Oswald for several minutes, the weight of evidence suggests he carried a package to work on the morning of November the 22nd. A far more contentious question is whether the package carried by Oswald was the same as the brown paper bag discovered on the 6th floor. According to both Randall and Frazier, the only two witnesses known to have seen the package, the answer was a definite no.
Now, was the length of the package any similar to the bag? Anywhere near similar?
Well, it wasn't that long. I mean, it was folded down at the top, as I told you. It definitely wasn't that long.
I told the FBI that as far as the length of the bag, I told them that was entirely too long.
Their main source of contention was that the package carried by Oswald was shorter than the brown paper bag. The bag was just long enough to store the rifle in its disassembled state, so if the package carried by Oswald was much shorter, then it could not have contained the rifle. Except Randall saw it briefly at a distance through a window, while Frazier never paid it much attention.
Did it look to you as if there was something heavy in the package?
Well, I'll be frank with you,
December
I
and
didn't
right
pay much attention to the
later
package.
on.
In fact, the length of the package seemed about as certain to Fraser as his lack of attention to it.
I didn't pay much attention. I didn't pay too much attention. I didn't pay any attention to it. I didn't pay much attention to the package. I didn't look at the package very much. Like I said,
Okay, I
I
get
didn't pay
it.
that much attention to it. I didn't pay too much attention to how he carried the package at all.
The tape and paper with which the brown paper bag had been constructed matched the tape and paper used to wrap books for shipping on the first floor of the book depository. Not only that, but a fingerprint and palm print matching that of Oswald were also found on the bag. In spite of all this, some authors refused to accept that the brown paper bag and the package carried by Oswald were one and the same. Instead, the argument tends to be that the bag was fabricated by authorities in an effort to frame Oswald. But you then have to square that against no curtain rods being found inside the book depository, Oswald already having curtains in his rented room in Dallas, him failing to obtain permission from his landlady to redecorate, him supposedly being in such urgent need of curtain rods that he just had to return to Irving on Thursday instead of waiting just one more day, him neglecting to mention anything about curtain rods to his wife and Ruth Payne upon his arrival, and that's despite the fact that Payne actually had some spare curtain rods in her garage. The same garage.
So it's not a curtain, obviously.
How did you learn of the shooting of President Kennedy?
I was watching television and Ruth said someone had shot at the president.
What did you say?
It was hard for me to say anything. We both turned pale. I went to my room and cried.
Did you think immediately that your husband might have been involved?
No.
Did Mrs. Payne say anything about the possibility of your husband being involved?
No, but she only said that, by the way, they fired from the building in which Lee is working. My heart dropped. I then went to the garage to see whether the rifle was there, and I saw that the blanket was still there, and I said thank God.
Did you look in the blanket to see if the rifle was there?
I didn't unroll the blanket. It was in its usual position, and it appeared to have something inside.
When did you learn that the rifle was not in the blanket?
When the police arrived and asked whether my husband had a rifle, and I said yes.
Then what happened?
They began to search the apartment. When they came to the garage and took the blanket, I thought, well, now they will find it. They opened the blanket, but there was no rifle there.
Around the time of the rifle's discovery on the 6th floor of the book depository, Captain William Fritz was appraised of Oswald's absence. Fritz immediately left the building and returned to police headquarters.
We were standing in the hallway when Captain Fritz walked in. He walked up to my colleagues and made the statement to them, "Go get a search warrant and pick up a man named Lee Oswald." And I asked the captain why he wanted him, and he said, well, he was employed down at the book depository, and he had not been present for a roll call of employees. And we said, "Captain, we will save you a trip, because there he sits."
Oh, they got caught.
After escaping the book depository, Oswald boarded a bus right about here. But the assassination ground traffic to a halt, so Oswald soon left the bus and hailed a cab. After returning to his rooming house in Oak Cliff, a neighborhood in southwestern Dallas, Oswald changed his clothes, grabbed a gun, and left in a hurry.
78. 78. You are in the Oak Cliff area, are you not? Langston Road. You will be at large for any emergency that comes in. 10-4.
Police patrolman J.D. Tippett encountered Oswald some 45 minutes after the shooting, a bit further south, right about here. As soon as Tippett stepped out of the vehicle, Oswald drew his gun and fired 4 shots in rapid succession.
Hello, police operator. Go ahead, Assassination News. Hello, we've had a shooting out here. Where is it at? Between Marsalis and Buckley. It's a police officer. Somebody shot him. What's this? 404 10th Street. 78. It's in a police car. Notify one that the officer involved in the shooting, which is Officer J.D. Tippett, we believe, was pronounced DOA at Methodist 128. Well, any indication
On arrival.
shooting? Well, the descriptions on the suspects are similar. He
Oswald was then caught sneaking into a nearby movie theater without purchasing a ticket.
I have information that a suspect just went in the Texas theater on West Jefferson. Simple.
A large contingent of officers descended upon the theater. They surrounded the building, switched on the lights, and approached the suspect. Flanked by officers, Oswald drew a gun and a brief scuffle ensued. But this time he was quickly subdued, handcuffed, and taken to police headquarters back in downtown Dallas. Over the next 2 days, between his arrest and untimely death, Lee Harvey Oswald was interrogated by members of the Dallas Police, FBI, Secret Service, among others. None of it was recorded.
Did you have any tape recorders?
No, sir. I don't have a tape recorder. We need one. If we had one at this time, we could have handled these conversations far better.
The Dallas Police Department doesn't have one.
No, sir. I have requested one several times, but so far, they haven't got me one.
So, no one knows exactly what was said inside this room. Instead, we have to settle for the Cliff Notes. And of especial interest to us is Oswald's alibi.
These people have given me a hearing without legal representation or anything.
Did you shoot the president?
I didn't shoot anybody, no, sir.
We just heard Oswald, who said he did not shoot anybody.
Oswald vehemently denied any involvement in the assassination. Instead, he claimed to have eaten lunch with 2 co-workers on the first floor of the Book Depository. One of them was a black co-worker whose name Oswald could not recall. The other was James Jarman.
Were you with anybody when you were walking around on the first floor finishing your sandwich?
No, I wasn't. I was trying to get through so I could get out on the street.
Did you see Lee Oswald?
No, I didn't.
After his arrest, he stated to a police officer that he had had lunch with you. Did you have lunch with him?
No, sir, I didn't.
Is it lying?
But according to another interrogator, room, together or separately during an unspecified period of time. Whether Oswald claimed to have eaten lunch with or in proximity of his colleagues, it makes no difference because neither alibi could be substantiated. Instead, James Jarman had last seen Oswald taking an elevator upstairs sometime between. It really skirts the line of self-incrimination.
When asked as
certain. But if Brennan is to be believed, this uncertainty was not genuine, but merely an act intended to protect his family.
I believed at that time, and I still believe, the assassination was a communist activity. And I felt like there hadn't been more than one eyewitness. And if it got to be a known fact that I was an eyewitness, my family or I, either one, might not be safe.
Well, if you wouldn't have identified Oswald during the lineup, might he not have been released by the police?
No, I already knew they had the man for murder, and I knew he would not be released.
The murder of whom?
Of Officer J.D. Tippett.
Well, what happened in between to change your mind that you later decided to come forth and tell the FBI that you could identify him?
After Oswald was killed, I was relieved quite a bit that, as far as pressure on myself of somebody not wanting me to identify anybody, there was no longer that immediate danger.
Could you tell us now whether you can or cannot positively identify the man you saw in the 6th floor window as the same man that you saw in the police station?
I could at that time. I could, with all sincerity, identify him as being the same man.
So, according to Brennan, within a few hours of the assassination, he'd become concerned that it was the product of a communist conspiracy. He feared that should he attempt to identify the gunman, he could become a target and thereby endanger his family.
Did you and your wife discuss any aspect of the assassination and you being present more or less at the scene of the assassination?
Yes, we discussed it. We talked. I talked of moving her and my grandson, who was living with us at that time, and my daughter, moving them out of town somewhere in secrecy. My wife seemed to think that a person can't get away wherever they go.
So when Brennan was brought down to view a lineup later that evening, he feigned uncertainty to protect his family. At least, so he claimed. I leave it up to you to decide whether to believe or disbelieve Brennan's story. On Sunday morning, November the 24th, Oswald was scheduled for transfer from the city to the county jail. Reporting from outside the police station, a local news correspondent couldn't help but to fix the whole shebang.
Now, this is the armored truck that will carry Lee Harold Oswald
from the basement here of Dallas Police Headquarters downtown to the Dallas County Sheriff's Office and the Dallas County Jail. Strict security precautions have been exercised from the very beginning and have been even increased this morning as fear arises and grows stronger that someone may attempt to take the life of the man accused of murdering the President of the United States.
He's been shot. He's been shot.
And there it is.
The doctors at Parkland Hospital said that the single shot could scarcely have done more damage to a body than that shot did to Lee Harvey Oswald. It penetrated his spleen, his pancreas, the aorta, the kidney, and the liver.
Oswald expired at 1:07 p.m. He died at 1:07 p.m. We have arrested the man. The man will be charged with murder.
Who is he?
The suspect's name is Jack Rubenstein, I believe. He goes by the name of Jack Ruby. That's all I have to say.
Okay, thoughts.
Throughout this video, we've encountered witnesses who not only contradicted each other, but also themselves. Central to many arguments of conspiracies that these contradictions represent attempts by the conspirators
Some bad memory and
to give you an example.
fabricated for their own ego.
Oswald on the first floor at 11:50. Then he denied ever saying that and claimed to have spoken with Oswald on the 6th floor at 11:55. Some authors have found this change a bit too convenient and suspected Givens was coerced to change his story by the conspirators. In support of that conclusion, we have this document in which Dallas Police Lieutenant Jack Revel said the following.
Lieutenant Revel stated that Givens had been previously handled by the Dallas Police Department on a marijuana.
He found himself at the right place at the right time to prepare and use the only building to which
guards.
But for a group of conspirators to handicap their own assassination plot requires a bit more ingenuity to explain. He was a patsy, he was supposed to get caught, there were multiple assassins, you know the drill. But there's so much of that in this case. So much had to go just right for a conspiracy and the subsequent cover-up to succeed. From the roundabout process by which Oswald was hired at the Book Depository to the selection of the motorcade route. From Oswald's narrow escape and subsequent arrest to him being given multiple chances to speak with the press. From the supposed tampering, suppression and planting of evidence to dozens of he was not exactly difficult to access. He was rather famous for abandoning his Secret Service detail and wandering off into crowds. In fact, that's precisely what he did on multiple occasions during this very trip.
Now decided to shake hands with one or two more people, but this is the moment where the Secret Service has its point of tension. They say when the president stops moving, that's when we're concerned, because that is when the possibility of trouble comes to the forefront. This was one of those impromptu moments for which President Kennedy is so well known. So many times you have heard that the Secret Service men suddenly find themselves without the president, that suddenly he has left them and stepped into the crowd and decided to shake hands and give his personal greetings. You could say perhaps that this is more the norm now than the unexpected, because it has been done so many times.
As this news correspondent was alluding to just a few